why we moved forward with a full health and safety program, what's some of the risks that we've recognized. But I want to focus more on the enhancement of the volunteer experience that comes from having a full program of safety that's in compliance with OHS. And that's such an important thing. It's not just about crossing the T's and dotting the I's. It's about having volunteers that feel safe, appreciate the work we go into. Just give a little background, if anyone's ever heard of the word Birkebeiner, maybe some of you have. The Canadian Birkebeiner Society is a registered nonprofit. We have an annual budget of roughly $300,000. Does not include our volunteer expenses. So when we recognize our volunteer expenses, we would add $180,000 to that figure. The Birkebeiner has been in operation for 39 years, and we were recognized by Canadian Archives as one of the longest continuous recreational sporting events in Canada. We're one of 3 sanctioned international Birkebeiner Loppets based on the Birkebeiner legend, and you can see more about that. It's an exciting story. Birkebeiner, Canadian Birkie, is a Loppet. Loppet is a Norwegian term that basically is a gathering of skiers. And it's always a recreational focus, although they're always timed events, but they are recreational in nature. And there's usually lots of food and drink involved with a Loppet as opposed to a race. We are a classic cross-country ski event. We also have other activities that we're involved in. We call ourselves the Birkie Festival. So to that end, we have on February 11th, the Birkie Sunday, and Birkie are the little Birkies. So kids under the age of 8 who want to try out their first ski, they can come and join us. Or there are also children that are already racing in race programs with other Nordic ski clubs in the area. We generally attract between 200 and 250 young skiers for that particular event. We've just recently added cycling programs to our portfolio. All told, we have over 2,300 participants in these particular events. I'm very proud to say we have 500 dedicated volunteers with over 6,000 hours dedicated towards making these events happen. In addition to those volunteers, we have an official board, 9 members, and we have a Loppet committee of 25 folks that look after the events specifically. We have key partnerships with Alberta Forestry and Parks at Cooking Lake Blackfoot Provincial Recreation Area. We have good fortune to have trails all through that particular area. In partnership with Alberta Forestry and Parks, we maintain grooming for cross-country skiing. Other partners include the Ukrainian Cultural and Heritage Village, where we do our long starts. So we are a point-to-point event. So we start at the Ukrainian Cultural and Heritage Village, and we move through Elk Island National Park, then through the recreation area to get to our finish line at Waskahegan. Our events are 55 and 31 kilometers for the long events, and we have 2 short events, 13 and 7 kilometers. We also partner with Strathcona County, Lamont County, and Beaver County in our emergency preparedness planning. So with these kinds of partners, it's very important that we have all of our ducks in a row because they have very specific requirements for us to work with them. We are also sanctioned by Nordique Canada, which is an important, that's where we get our insurance from. And they have as well have requirements for us to be a sanctioned event. With the Birkie, we operate in the winter. So it's an endurance event. So we have a very specific list of risks that are associated with being out in the cold in the winter in a remote area. Its safety has always been a focus of the Birkie. Prior to 2018, it involved go, no go policies around weather and course condition. When the legislation made it clear that volunteers are to be considered workers with all the rights and obligations thereof, we made efforts to develop our safety program. We were also encouraged by Alberta Forestry and Parks in their operating agreement to come up with a full OHS compliant program in order for us to operate. So we were told this is what you need to do. And we developed that on the fly. We were advised in October of 2018, and by the end of November, our safety team put together a safety and environment manual complete with hazard assessments and submitted it to Parks for approval. And we were approved, and of course, we ran our event on that basis. Our current agreement with Alberta Forestry and Parks is a 5-year agreement, and it actually requires a certificate of recognition or equivalent OHS health and safety program. We have the equivalent program. We were required to do this in our contract with Alberta Forestry and Parks. There's also a lot of good reasons for us to be involved in these kinds of safety programs and in following the legislation. Risks, what risks are associated? Possible litigation of the board or board members and appointed delegates. We have 9 board members, 25 Loppet committee members. Anything can happen. We are certainly liable for those people and for their health and safety. With improper procedures, we could face fines and sentencing. In certain cases, it could cease business operations. If someone came and sued us for $1 million because they tripped over a timing strip, that would put us out of business. There's also the guilt and long-term trauma that's associated. And I have a little article to the right of this slide that talks about a marathon that happened a few years ago in China, where 21 participants froze to death. What the impact was on these organizers: fines, jail sentences. Official in charge of the event jumped off the roof of a high-rise apartment building. I know that's not our jurisdiction, but the risks that you say here have to do with the livelihood of the organization and the well-being of everybody in charge. So we take that very seriously. Risk mitigation measures. So these are the kinds of things that we initiated in 2018. We have full board and staff commitment. Our president of the board signs an initial page in our safety and environment manual. We have a safety and environment management committee composed of the president, our chief of safety, our chief of Loppet, and our Birkie coordinator manual. Our manual's extensive. It calls into play all of the various hazards that we have. We have a hazard assessment for every task that our volunteers are involved in. We list in there training requirements. We do have folks out on the trail that are using specialized equipment. We have instituted a toolbox safety meeting and sign-in sheet with volunteers, and we have every volunteer that shows up must sign in and sign out and participate in their toolbox safety meeting. It's important for us to have all of the volunteers involved in that process, because when they start to think safe, when they start to think about the things that they're doing, then that's always at the front of their minds. We have incident reporting, very, very critical, and it's very critical to impart upon the volunteers that when there is an incident, to report it. People just don't want to do a report, don't want to fill it in, or don't want to be involved in that whole process. And so it's very important to convey that message. We have a go, no-go policy. That go, no-go policy defines when we won't go because of a weather event or course being unsafe. There is a specific list of parameters that are involved in that. We have a jury that adjudicates the policy 7:30 a.m. of the morning of the event and determines whether it's going to go ahead or not, or be modified in some fashion. Emergency response planning is really a key item for us as well. It's quite often something people don't think about in nonprofits when they're having an event, but some events are very complicated, including ours, where we have up to 9 and 10 remote work sites, so to speak, that are more than 20 minutes away from our main stadium, Waskahegan. So that's a very important, and talk a little bit about that a little later. Volunteer orientation is a very important aspect. This year, we'll do 2 nights of volunteer orientation with all of our volunteers invited. We use that as an appreciation. So we serve some food and we have lots of visiting going on, and we use it as a training opportunity to make sure that the volunteers participating or volunteering for a certain activity understand what their tasks are, what needs to happen, and how to be safe at that. Debriefing, particularly in the case of an incident, reviewing an incident and coming up with corrective plans. I'll share a story about our event earlier this year in 2023. It did not involve a volunteer, but we did have a participant who experienced a cardiac arrest on the course and was treated by our medical team that was at the closest aid station. And this medical team was composed of 2 medical students from the U of A, and they greeted this particular skier who was having difficulty breathing. When that patient lost consciousness, they committed CPR, 30 rounds of CPR, 3 rounds defibrillator, and revived the skier so that he was conscious and alive when he left in the ambulance. The importance of debriefing was clear because although these were medical students, they hadn't experienced that kind of a life-threatening situation or actually committing CPR and the defibrillation. And so We met with their counselor and their group to discuss what happened and to ensure that they understood that they followed the principles and the policies that we have, and that they did a magnificent job of reviving that particular skier. Emergency response plan. I wanted to talk about that because that's such a key element. It's so critical for us to consider any kind of eventuality. Simple things like how you handle electronics, microphones, for instance. We want to make sure all of our participants, volunteers, are aware of this response plan. They know what's going to happen. We get down to the very specifics, such as if there's a train derailment. There is a train that passes through our Drawson. There was a derailment and some kind of chemical issue or anything. We need to know what we're going to do under that circumstance. If there's rain in the day and the course becomes too icy, if the weather changes and there's a high wind event which drops trees and other materials onto the trail, these are all things that we need to have plans for. And so we do that. WCB. Most nonprofits with volunteers do not have WCB coverage, and it is not required. And I won't talk too much about that because you'll hear a little bit more from one of our other speakers about that particular topic. From our perspective, when we started to get deep into the OHS requirements, we also thought, well, what do we do about WCB? And although volunteers aren't required, we are not required to register volunteers for coverage. We sought legal advice, and our lawyer said, take it, you need it, particularly under the new legislation. And it's certainly all the benefits, and I think we'll hear more about that later on, are critical for not only for the security and well-being of our volunteers, but for the administrators and organizers as well. Wanted to talk a little bit about cost because that always comes up, right? Whenever I was recently at a bicycle organizing race event, and I mentioned OHS and WCB coverage, and the typical answer or response that I get is, don't want to hear about it, go away. I think that there's two things. One, that there's this perception that it's onerous to put together. Developing the safety manual does take a lot of time. One of our board members committed over 200 hours to put that together. And then it's an ongoing process throughout time to update it and to make sure that it is current. Other items that cost safety committee meetings, the training, that's $240 to train someone in snowmobiles, but it's an essential requirement. Our volunteer orientation evenings cost roughly $10,000 to put on. But of course, they do double duty. They're an appreciation as well as an orientation from a safety perspective. Our WCB coverage for volunteers is coverage for approximately $180,000 of value for volunteer time. And that at 86 cents is our rate, costs us about $1,600 per season. Very, very inexpensive coverage, I would suggest, to ensure your volunteers that they will be taken care of in a way that's fair. We do have to manage the WCB hours. That's fairly simple process. First aid requirements, of course, in following the OHS requirements, we do look at all the resources that are available there. We calculate what we need to supply our offsite, our remote work sites, what we need for requirements for first aiders and for first aid equipment. Of course, the training, we've already covered that. If I was to say, how much does that cost the Birkie every year to put on? You could look at it and you could say it's $20,000. If you take out the volunteer orientation, it's $10,000. I would suggest to you that it's priceless at the end of the event when you can say to yourself, we did everything we could possibly do to keep our volunteers safe. And I know they do appreciate that. Those are some of the things about enhancing the volunteer experience. It's tremendous for volunteers to be offered training. There's so few people will do that, but we do say, look, you want to take it? We're going to give you first aid training, because the more first aiders we have available on site, the better. We provide the training for special operations, for tool use. We're very careful to give recognition of the tasks related to their responsibilities, and which is what we do at the orientation. If we're having them like camp chefs, we show them how to do that and how to do that safely. So from our experience, when we say at the orientation to volunteers, we have WCB coverage and we're looking after you, I usually get the odd look, what's this all about? Because so few groups do that, but I can't imagine putting on this kind of an event without the security that's provided through OHS processes by WCB coverage.